This is Beyond the Big Screen podcast with your host, Steve Guerra. Thank you for listening to Beyond the Big Screen podcast, where we talk about great movies and stories so great they should be movies. Find show notes, links to subscribe, and leave Apple Podcast reviews by going to our website, beyondthebigscreen.com. And now, let's go beyond the big screen.
Everybody, welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Big Screen. I am super excited today to be joined by Adam Tex Davis. He is the co-founder and COO of Atomic Entertainment Group. Thank you so much for joining us today, Adam. And maybe just introduce yourself to our audience. Or do you prefer Tex, I assume?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Adam Davis is a very common name. You Google search Adam Davis, 5,000 people pop up, including my cousin who's a lunatic. And so very early on, I added the Tex. It was kind of an inside joke in college. I was in my student film. I played a character Tex. People were calling me Tex. I had a jacket that said Tex on the back. And it just became a fun nickname. But now it's like if you Google search Adam Tex Davis, I come up. So it became a marketing sort of a way to separate myself from all the other Adam Davises. And then, I've always been a writer. I've followed many different paths in writing. I thought I wanted to be Stephen King and write horror novels. Then I thought I was going to be a journalist until I realized I didn't have enough journalistic integrity to not make things up if the story wasn't good enough. So I was like, I have enough journalistic integrity to know that I had no journalistic integrity. So I gave that up. But then I was like, where can I take kernels of truth and embellish them and make great stories? Oh, screenwriting. I went to film school. I wanted to be a writer-director, came out of school, wrote some scripts. They got some attention with my student film. I was able to sell some scripts. I get hired for rewrites. So I had like 10 plus years of just screenwriting. Then I got more into television, did some television stuff. Got an Emmy nomination for a show I helped co-create. And then, transitioned into podcasting as well. So it's always, there's always a pivot, but it's always using my writing skills and my storytelling skills. So that's the through line to my career.
As somebody in the entertainment industry, what do you think about Hollywood? What do you think about the whole system of how it works, especially as a writer? Because that's a lot of the things that we talk about on this podcast is how stories are created. And do you think that the way Hollywood works today is the best way to get really good stories?
Well, I mean, there's always the thing like the Hollywood, look, it's a business, it's show business. So I get that they're just trying to make a lot of money. And a lot of times it's, having IP that already exists, underlying, properties, books, turning books into movies, games, now it's superheroes and, a lot of prequels and sequels and all that stuff. So, remakes, it's a little disheartening in one sense when you want to tell original stories, but there are avenues to do that. But it's, I definitely feel less of a connection with Hollywood than I used to. And it's shrunk a lot. It's contracted. So there used to be a lot of places to sell scripts, to take meetings and stuff. That's kind of, definitely shrunk to the point where there's just a handful of places you can go with stuff. And now the TV business has done the same thing. Used to go out to 20 different places to pitch your show. Now, there's a conglomerate that's 5 different channels now boiled into one, and you pitch one person and they decide if it's good for any of their vehicles, or verticals, I should say. The point is, it can be a little disheartening, but it's if this is what you're meant to do, then you just keep getting back on the horse. You get knocked down, you get back up, and more things you do are not going to get made. More things you do are not going to sell, but that going in, and you never know what's going to happen. So I've had great highs as well.
Just even with our medium that we're doing right now with podcasting, it's exploded so much in the last decade and a half, where the point where you can make a podcast that sounds almost radio quality, and it has democratized basically essentially radio. Do you see something happening with that with film and with TV where people can make something that's almost to professional quality, and then we can start telling stories that may not be the most economic for a big thing like a big movie company to make, but you can do something that's more democratic, you might say.
For sure. I mean, look, the thing we love about podcasts is that we don't have to rely on a studio or a network telling us what we can't do. We don't get notes. We own all the IP 100%. So, at this point, I've got about 5 podcasts, different podcasts that, we can talk about later. But, that's the fun of that. And that all started during the pandemic for us because we couldn't shoot anything, couldn't go out, we couldn't leave our homes. So we got microphones and we just started, recording some stuff. And, it's also a very written medium. So it's like, I could put my writer brain, write something fun, record it, and put it out there. In terms of film, yeah, I mean, you look at what like Sean Baker is doing, like with his movie. I mean, he did Tangerine all on a phone, and then the Florida Project blew up for him. Now Anora is in Oscar contention, and he tells stories that are not conventional, that are not Hollywood stories, and they get attention. So like if you're a good storyteller and you meet the right people and you keep your budgets low, you can tell interesting things out there. So there is that indie market. But it's not, it's a slog. It's a slog, until you become a name and people trust you. I've got a couple of things out there now that we're trying to attach to an actor that means just a little bit so that, somebody would be interested in it.
Steve here with a quick word from our sponsors. Now, speaking of your podcast, you have a couple of podcasts, and the one podcast that really caught my attention. So this podcast, the Oscars, what were they thinking? I think that when I started listening to that podcast, it was like, that's almost what we're going for in this show, is to deep dive into some of these things. And what were they thinking? What was your genesis for that idea? Maybe give us a little background, and then we can dig into some of your ideas, because I think in a lot of ways it's quite iconoclastic, which I think people who listen to this show will definitely enjoy.
Great. Well, that's music to my ears. Thank you. Yeah, the Oscars, what were they thinking? I mean, it all started in a conversation I was having with an editor friend where we were like, they shouldn't have the Oscars at the end of the year because it's too soon to know which movies are really going to stand the test of time. We should give like the way a baseball player takes like 5 or 10 years to get into the Hall of Fame. Let's take some time, and then 10 years from now, we could look back at the films of 10 years ago and decide which one really stood out as the best film. And then I, taking that premise, kind of jokingly, I started looking back at old Oscars and seeing all these crazy anomalies like, wow, like 2 films that got all the nominations, but there was a third film that didn't get any. That's the one that everybody talks about and still loves today. And the others, who cares? Like there was so many who cares moments. And then there's like weird battles between films. There's, look, it's all subjective. It's not sports. You don't score a touchdown and win the Oscars. Like it's people's opinion. But it is funny how many things, like you could look back and almost as a film goer go, did they get that right? And there's so many, like now I'm really immersed in it. So I'm seeing all these Reddit subreddits and stuff of people like fighting over, was this really the best movie? Should this have been nominated? Why were these movies nominated and not these? So it's something I think cinephiles and even casual moviegoers alike, can dig into. And it's fun to debate. And more so, it's fun to mention all these older movies. Like at the end of the show, I list out all the movies that we talked about, and there'll be like 40 different titles so that people can go back and check out some of these movies that either didn't get the credit it deserved, I think, or just, why not, fill in your blank spots of movies that came out in 1960 or 1972 or, whatever.
Yeah, I love that idea of separating it in time where you have no perspective really to really maybe objectively look at a movie isn't the right way, but at least to have a little bit of space to say that, this one particular movie just grabbed the zeitgeist. And what's often the difference? Sometimes a movie is released and within 6 months or less, it's getting nominated or not. There's a sweet spot, from what I understand, of when they want to release a movie.
Well, yeah, I mean, December is usually the Oscar bait month. They put their prestige things there, so it's the freshest in everybody's mind. You forget, oh, wait, that movie came out in January, early in the year, and you forgot about it. And, it was maybe a contender for the first 3-4 months, and then it gets forgotten about. I mean, I would also be remiss. I have to mention my co-star on this show. It's the incomparable Bruce Vilanch, who is just a comedy legend. Comedy joke writer, and he's written everything, books, screenplays, but more so, he worked for the Oscars for 25 plus years. He was the one writing the show. So he has all these behind the scenes backstory, great behind the scenes moments with the stars on Hollywood's biggest night. But also, he's like a movie encyclopedia. So I'll say, like, look, I know The Color Purple and Out of Africa were battling it out in for the 1986 Oscar. But to me, Back to the Future was the best movie that came out that year, wasn't even nominated. And then he'll explain why he thinks those movies were nominated, why Back to the Future wasn't. And he can do that with almost any movie so far in all the years we've covered. He has, so he, in my mind, it's like, the Oscars, what were they thinking? And to him, it's like, no, the Oscars, what were they thinking? Here, I will tell you what they were thinking. So we kind of compete and debate and go at each other. I'm sort of the everyman movie guy, and he's the Oscar. He represents the Academy Awards in a way.
Yeah, I really love that dynamic of that. You have ideas and thoughts, and he's the insider, but he does not. He's like an insider, but an outsider. Like he has this perspective that feels like an outsider perspective, but he's as insider as you could really get.
Yeah, Bruce would love to be called Inside Out. That is definitely a great way to describe him. He is the ultimate outsider who happens to be inside. Like, wait, what's this guy doing here? Oh, he's also the funniest guy in the room, And yeah, I mean, if I can win him over, like, that's like a big, a big feather in my cap. Like at any point in the episode, because I'll say something like, so-and-so was snubbed. And he's like, I don't believe in snubs. He's like, what, why a snub? No, they voted what they like. So what's a snub? And then I'll point out something like, well, for example, The Color Purple was nominated for 11 Oscars for every single category except Best Director. So you're going to tell me that Steven Spielberg, who finally is doing a serious movie and got this movie made when no one else could, and had best actresses and best picture and best score and best all this writing, everything, but not the director, he goes, okay, maybe you might be right. Maybe he was snubbed. And I'm like, oh, thank you, Bruce. Thank you. So little things like that are always great. And I got him to admit that maybe he would have voted for Back to the Future too. But he definitely does take the Academy side, because he's like, look, these are beautiful movies. Like, you might think that this shouldn't have been nominated, but let me explain to you why it was and what, so yeah, we have interesting conversations and debates.
Just to level set, most people are familiar with the Oscars, and you use the term Academy, and most people are familiar with that, but how does this organization work? Like, who runs it? How is it established? What are some of maybe the nuts and bolts of the Academy and the Oscars?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, it was established in the early days to, bring attention to movies. And I know it was like some of the luminaries. I don't know if it was like Jack Warner or somebody, from that era, established it. But also it's like the arts and sciences, because there was science happening, like the film, going from silent to talking and like cameras and there was science being introduced to the public sphere. So they want to award that. And they just wanted to bring a lot of attention to the best movies. And look, the early Oscars in the 30s, there's a lot of great movies, like where you're like, okay, yeah, I get it. And even the head-to-heads are phenomenal. Like, The Wizard of Oz and what's the Gone with the Wind. And also there was another great movie that came out that year. So it's like, there's a lot of really good stuff competing. Look, everybody loves Citizen Kane. It's known as one of the greatest movies of all time. Didn't win the Oscar the year it came out. How Green Is My Valley won that year, and also a great movie. So it was started to just shine a light on movies. In fact, it wasn't even for the public in terms of the ceremony. It was like a private party. The original Oscars were like private. Then it was like, oh, no, you know what? The public would probably like to see the stars and stuff. So they introduced, having it be a big spectacle. And then, the one thing a lot of people don't realize is there's all these different branches in the Academy. So there's the director's branch, the writer's branch, the actor's branch, and those branches nominate the nominees for that category. And then the entire Academy votes on the overall winners once they have the nominees. So that's why sometimes you'll see a weird movie that doesn't show up anywhere else except the writers liked it. A lot of times the writer, and everybody in the Academy works in the business. So it's not like fans. It's not like pretend journalists like the Golden Globes. It's not, it's working people in the Academy. So, the writers often, Bruce will say, the writers will vote for the movie that they wish they wrote. And so therefore, you'll see sometimes some odd movies that only appear there. Or why did the directors vote for this and not this? They appreciated the work of this director. So then, once the nominees are set, then the entire Academy votes on those.
How many people are you talking about in the entire Academy that would be voting, and then in any of the sub divisions, if the actors are choosing? How many are we talking about? Hundreds, thousands?
I mean, I think it's thousands overall. The actors branch is the biggest one. The director's branch is kind of smaller. The writer's branch, I think, is smaller. The one thing Bruce also points out is the documentary is the only category where they literally make every, it's a small group, but they make you watch every movie. You're not allowed to not watch all the movies. You have to literally show up, sign in, and watch the movies and check them off. And then it's the only one where everybody has seen all the movies, except maybe he jokes in the animation category because everybody has kids and their kids want to see the animated movies. So they've probably seen those over the course of the year. But the different branches, they differ in size, actors being the most. And, I think it's thousands overall. I know we started to talk about a breakdown on one of the episodes, but it ranges from hundreds to thousands.
And they're registered in some way or vetted by the Academy?
Yeah, I don't know the official entry process, but, they definitely, there's definitely a process that they go through. And, it's people in the industry, oftentimes. I mean, I don't know how you get around conflict of interest. How do you not vote for yourself if you're in the cinematographer's, branch? It's I did a movie this year, but I'm sure they have a you can't vote for yourself rule.
And you make an interesting point that it really is, it's art and science. And some of the categories are much more art and some are much more science. And you can see in cinematography or sound design or something like that, where that is, you can put a much more objective standard on that. If somebody tried something innovative or something like that, do people discuss what their thought process is on the artistic matter of it? I would say best actors, and those are definitely more of a subjective. Has there anybody dug into the inside, or what is your thought process on that, of how is it become very subjective and just sort of what the zeitgeist of the time is?
I think so. I mean, look, I make a joke there was a sandwich list. Somebody had made a sandwich list of the 101 best sandwiches in New York. And so I decided I was going to eat all the 101 best sandwiches. And then one day I went to this deli and I bought the sandwich that was on the list, but I noticed the deli had at least 100 sandwiches of its own. And I'm like, okay, so then you're telling me somebody ate all 100 of those sandwiches, then this one the best out of those 100, and then compared that to all the other sandwiches and all the other delis and all the other places in the city? No, somebody just said, hey, check out this sandwich. I think it's good. And they took it and they said, yeah, it is good. I'm going to put it on my list. So all the movies that come out that year, you can't watch everything and then really just sit and have an FBI chart with who's the best. it's in the zeitgeist. People start talking, things get buzz. They watch the buzzy things and then decide from that. There's no way you can watch everything and compare every performance against each other. It's it's impossible. So they watch certain movies. They gravitate towards certain things. And that's why a lot of times, especially I found in the 80s, like the most, I don't know, movies I don't even want, like, I have to go back and watch them for the show, but it's like homework. And I'm like, was this really the best movie? I don't think so. But it's what they, at the Academy at that time gravitated towards, and they thought it was good, and they gave it the accolades. So, yeah, I mean, I think with some of those artistic things, it's like, what's getting buzz? Those things rise to the top, and then they watch it and they say, yeah, okay, I think it deserves it. And then they put their vote down. They're not trying to be maverick and watch some obscure thing that like nobody knows. And although sometimes it feels that way, like Nomadland, but I'll tell you what, I watched Nomadland and it was a beautiful movie. So I get it. But, for the most part, yeah, I think it's what has risen to the top in the zeitgeist. And that's what they're choosing from.
Yeah, I think you make a great point there, especially with that sandwich thing, because that's something that we as just regular people can go and test. They released the best barbecue in the world, basically. And one of the places is right near my house. And I was like, yeah, I've had better. And there's better in this, like in the general neighborhood. And this place won Michelin stars. And I won't say the name because people will probably figure out where I live. And then they'll figure out how to that I don't have any taste. But it really is. There is such a subjective quality to these things that people place so much value on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of my favorite things to do is to go back to a year, especially if it's a year that I either before my time or before I really got into film watching, and it's like, okay, what movie won, what movies were nominated, and then what other movies came out that year? And so many times I'm like, wait, that came out that year and didn't get any love? We still talk about that today. And one of the ones I love is the 1961 Oscars for the films of 1960, because, and this was like a pinnacle for me in knowing like this is a show. And it's funny because I actually went to dinner with Bruce before I even pitched him the show idea. Bruce, myself, and my business partner, Jerry Colber, who knows Bruce as well, the three of us went out for dinner, and I brought up in 1960, 3 movies came out. All 3 are currently on the AFI, the American Film Institute's top 100 American films of all time. Three movies came out that year that are on that list. Only one of them was nominated for an Oscar. The other 2 didn't even get nominated. And they're huge movies that if I mentioned, you'd be like, wait, what? They didn't get nominated? And then he started to explain to me why he thought they didn't get nominated. And I started to go, okay, but if I'm going back in my Quentin Tarantino revisionist history time machine and changing the Oscars, I'm going to put those movies in and I'm going to pull 2 movies out and that I haven't even heard of. And so we started combating over steak in an LA steakhouse. And my, Jerry was like, okay, stop. This is the show. Stop it. And and just to fill you in, it's like, yeah, The Apartment with Jack Lemmon, Billy Wilder movie, won the Oscar that year. Great movie. No complaints. Other movies nominated, Elmer Gantry, the Burt Lancaster movie, also a great movie. And Burt Lancaster wins the Academy Award for that. And then Sons and Lovers, The Sundowners, and The Alamo, starring John Wayne, are the other 3 nominees. So you're like, okay, I don't know if I've seen any of them. And The Alamo isn't even like a top-tier John Wayne movie. And then, okay, you start looking at other nominees. For Best Director, one of the nominees was Alfred Hitchcock for a little movie called Psycho. And you're like, wait, what? Psycho came out that year? And then the Best Supporting Actor was Peter Ustinov for a little movie called Spartacus, which also came out that year. So it's like, neither were nominated. And then Bruce is like, Spartacus is a sword and sandal movie. There was a whole bunch of them. Ben-Hur, this one, that one. It's just another sword and sandal movie. I'm like, okay, but we still talk about Spartacus today. Okay? We still talk about Psycho today. They remake Psycho. They made sequels. They made a TV show that, it's in the zeitgeist. And at the very least, you should have nominated Anthony Perkins for Norman Bates. It's one of the most iconic parts of all time. So, that's the kind of stuff we talk about.
Steve here with a quick word from our sponsors. And that's a good thing, because when you can look at it retrospectively like that, you can look at a movie like The Alamo. The Alamo is definitely the end of an era of that sort of movie that was almost like a play. Sword and Sandals were kind of in their mid-career.
Right.
And then you have something like Psycho that's completely innovative and that would define really the next several decades of movies. And when you can dip into there, it's something that you couldn't necessarily see if you were voting on those movies in 1961. But now with a little bit of perspective, and like you said in the podcast, and probably 5 years later in the late 60s, you could have seen that the Alamo style of movie was dead. Sword and Sandals were fading out, and Psycho was maybe one of the greatest movies of all time, top 5, most people would probably say.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fantastic movie, but Bruce was like, it was probably a little much for people. The cross-dressing, using a penis, a knife as a penis, and there's a lot, killing. I mean, look, the killing off your star, like a third of the way or whatever into the movie. Oh, that took people by surprise, and I think Janet Leigh was nominated. I don't know if she won, but so they did recognize that. But yeah, they thought it was a gimmick film. Interesting. Just the time, and I'm like, look, I don't say it has to win. I'm just saying we're going to go back and we're going to fix the Oscars, and I'm going to put, I'm going to take the Alamo out and I'm going to put Psycho in. Like, so sue me. I think most film watchers would agree.
So if you had to say that there's problems with the system or things that you could maybe fix with the system of how movies are chosen, would you change anything? Do you think that it works pretty well for what it is?
Yeah, I don't know if there's anything to fix. I mean, it is interesting that there's like, and Bruce will be the first one to say it too. It's like, we'll talk about a movie. I'll say like Die Hard, for example, and I'm half joking. I know Die Hard isn't technically an Academy Award type of movie, but then again, why not? Most action movies are terrible. This one is great, and it's the one everybody knows and loves, and it's set off a whole new way of doing action movies. Now it's Die Hard set here, Die Hard set there. And it pulled off an amazing thing, and I'm like, I know it's not an Academy movie, but like that's the thing, the term, oh, that's not an Academy Award movie, and this is. And it's like, so what, long and boring and slow is Academy worthy, and fun and exciting is not? And then, it's funny because they expanded it from 5 films to 10, in large part because The Dark Knight didn't get nominated and everybody loved that movie so much. And then they expanded it to 10, and then the next year it came out, the nominees, and a lot of small little movies were suddenly included. It wasn't what the intended result. You thought you'd have a lot of big, crazy, actiony and big blockbustery movies. No, suddenly like A Simple Man from the Coen brothers is nominated, and like little small movies are finally getting their due. So yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if there's a fix. I think, it's like the mindset of what, this couldn't possibly be an Academy movie. I mean, maybe you take that away, but look, it feels like they're doing some of that too. Some of the movies that get nominated, Joker got nominated and, things like that. It's like, it looks like they're trying to expand a little bit into, popular things that, people saw, as opposed to just a bunch of like 5 movies where, my mom is like, I don't know, what are those? I haven't seen any of those. So, it'd be nice to get away from that. But as far as fixing it, I don't know.
It could be interesting to try new categories, possibly. Like with Bruce Willis, you talked about this with Bruce Valanche in one of your episodes, that it was really out of left field. He was not an action actor at that point. He was more of a kind of a sappy romance. I don't remember exactly what I thought about that, but thinking about it now in retrospect, that was a different casting choice.
100%. I loved Moonlighting. I used to watch it all the time. It reminded me, it's like the screwball comedies of the 30s and 40s, and the fast talking, fast paced. I mean, he was great. And then it's like, oh, he's going to be in this action movie. And I remember seeing the commercials for it, and I was like, it looks cool. I was in high school, I think, I think it was in high school, and I went to see it with my friends, and we weren't expecting much. And we walked out of the theater like, wow, that was one of the best action movies I think I've ever seen. Like, it was great. The way Jaws, it's a shark movie. It's a monster movie. It eats people. And then you like watch the movie and you're like, that was like one of the best movies I think I've ever seen. It just felt like a great movie. And I was not expecting that at all. Like, okay, they're going to, prop up a guy who, make a guy who's not tough seem tough. Oh, no, he was great. So that's why I say, like, why don't we recognize some of that? Like, recognize what he did, recognize what Alan Rickman did as the bad guy, redefined, how sinister you can be and smart. And, he's such a good actor. So, I don't know. I like shining a light on movies that never get mentioned when you think of the Academy Awards.
There's one that's just fresh in my mind because I was just talking about this movie, LA Confidential. And one of the things that really stuck out with the people we were talking to about it was the fabulous acting from all the leads. And none of the male leads got a nomination for that. It was only Kim Basinger, who did an excellent job as well, but her role was it was very important, but it was pretty minimal as well.
Yeah.
And I think that was one, if you were to revisit it, would be totally different. I'm not sure who they were up against either in 1998.
Yeah, and you know what? You can't use that crutch that Bruce uses all the time. That was a career award. So many times I'll say, like, why did this person win this acting award and not, this great performance? So, well, it was a career award. They felt like, all right, Kim Basinger didn't need a career award. In fact, can you name another movie where you're like, oh yeah, she was amazing in 9.5 weeks? Like, what do you, no, look, she's not bad, but I'd have to look at the other nominees and the other movies, but I'm sure we'd find something better.
Yeah. What are some ones that really stand out to you where you would have totally picked a different winner altogether? Are there some ones that really are stuck in your craw?
I mean, look, there's a lot of the big ones. Look, Ordinary People, great movie. But Raging Bull, come on, And I remember when, Raging Bull won like the best film of the decade. Like I went to the movies in like '89 to see Raging Bull on the big screen because it had been awarded the best film of the decade. So then it's like hilarious that the best film of the decade didn't win the Oscar the year it came out. Like weird things like that. Obviously Saving Private Ryan, losing to Shakespeare in Love. Okay, and I know the Harvey of it all and the lobbying that went on, but really, Goodfellas losing to Dances with Wolves. Although I will say, Dances with Wolves is quite an achievement, but it is hilarious to think like until Scorsese won the Oscar for Departed, like Kevin Costner had more Oscars than Martin Scorsese. And he kept losing to directors. Like he lost to Robert Redford for Best Director with Raging Bull versus Ordinary People. And it's just like these actors come on, they directed a movie, they have like 1 or 2 credits, and then they win the Oscar and one of the greatest directors of all time, And then, it's just funny, like, Al Pacino winning for Scent of a Woman. Okay, but the guy had never won an Oscar. It's like, you can go to Al Pacino's house and not see an Oscar? That feels criminal. So, of course, they had to give it to him. And it's just like, unfortunate, like, it's, if you're ranking Al Pacino performances, Scent of the Woman is probably not the top one. So it just shows like, the arbitrary nature. And, sometimes they do award career things. Sometimes there's, okay, we better give Paul Newman this award because he doesn't have one, that kind of thing.
I would honestly love to see an Oscars or some sort of award ceremony that's maybe 2, 5, 10 years later. And so that you could have a little bit more objectivity on it. Even if it was the same people who are the judges, that could be interesting to see of what they think of a movie, from the mid 90s or the early 2000s, what they think rises to the top.
I mean, who knows? They probably still get it wrong. Like, it's hard to say. Again, it's so subjective. It's like people vote what they like. And, there's, like I said, I look at the subreddits now for the Oscars to see what people are talking about, and they'll say like, oh, this movie won, but it was a really strong year. And then I'm looking at the movies that are on the nominees, and I'm like, strong year, really? Because like I don't love any of these movies. So then I realized, yeah, I have my taste, they have their taste. Everybody's taste is different. So I mean, that's the fun part of it. I mean, I'm not trying to say this needed to win and this needed to lose. I'm just saying, like, looking through the test of time, which movies do we really remember and care about from that year, and which movies could maybe have been considered, or just it's just cool to talk about, cool movies, cool performances, great directing, great camera work, So yeah, and like I just saw the remake of the Nosferatu, and it just reminded me of how good like Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula was. I loved it, and how good Gary Oldman was. And I was like, I love, and then just like, did that get nominated? Let me look it up, and it's like, probably not.
What are some years that come out in your mind that were just particularly strong years for movies, that a dozen movies came out that were just top notch? A couple of years come to my mind.
Well, I will say this, the best decade by far is the 70s. Like, you look at the 70s and you look at these matchups and who loses, who wins, and you're like, whatever, toss up. Like, even in the weakest of the years, Kramer versus Kramer beats Apocalypse Now, but still, those are two great movies. It is kind of cool that the small human drama wins over the gigantic war spectacle, but they're both great movies. But like the 70s were just, between, A Dog Day Afternoon and The Godfathers and Rocky and Star Wars and Jaws, and, all these movies came out during that decade, and like having to pick one over the other, it's like, that's going to be the toughest, in a way, because it's like, yeah, they kind of get it right in the 70s. I would say is super strong. There's certain decades, even early on, 30s and 40s, there was a lot of really strong contenders. I got really into film noir, and over the pandemic, I was watching lots of film noir movies from the 40s, 50s, and I was happy to see a bunch of them did get nominated. Like The Killers, with Burt Lancaster, Ava Gardner. Like, I was like, that was a great movie, and oh yeah, got nominated. Oh, cool. Every year has strong contenders, I would say. But yeah, a lot of times you're just like, wait, E.T. lost? Why? This is the best movie. Really? You're going to give it to, I think Gandhi. I don't know if that was the Gandhi year or the Chariots of Fire year. And I mean, I remember as a kid, to me, I was, kid of the 80s. To me, the Oscars were like, where they just give an award to a long, boring movie that I didn't want to see. It wasn't until I think Platoon won where I was like, finally, a movie I liked, wins an Oscar. Oh, wow, you can do that?
Steve here again with a quick word from our sponsors. Yeah, that is the interesting thing, is that sometimes these movies that are really challenging and that should win an award maybe aren't the most entertaining, especially broadly entertaining. Where something like Platoon, you get a balance of both of them in there, and it's great directing and great scenery. Like, the whole thing is great, and it was entertaining as well.
100%. Yeah, I mean, I will say this too. It's like, it's funny, and I don't know if I've mentioned this on the show yet, but I'm a huge list guy, as you could tell from the sandwiches. I love making lists of movies in genres or categories or whatever. So I have my film noir list, I have my Western list, I have my horror list, I have foreign movies list, all these different lists. The one that's the most tedious, the one that's the hardest one for me to check off, is always the Oscars. Best picture winners for a lot of them, especially from the 80s on. And even the nominees. And it's just like a lot of movies. I'm like, okay, it's like homework movies. And it is literally homework now because for the podcast, but it's not the movies I gravitate towards. It's a lot of stuff. And then, yeah, I started to make a list of, starting with the 70s. It's like, you take the winners and you say, is this a must-see movie? Is this a should-see? Or is this a, yeah, you don't have to? And like, if I was talking to like my daughter who's 20 and trying to educate her on films that were, made before she was born. And if I was making the list, okay, you got to see this one. You got to see this one. You got to see this one. Every movie in the 70s that won is a must see. The 80s, 2 or 3 must sees, maybe 3 or 4 must sees. Then you get into the 2000s and stuff, 90s and the 2000s. And it's like, it goes way down. It's like in the 2010s, I think there was like one movie that I thought was like a must-see movie. The rest, I'm like, yeah, don't worry about it. So it's like, I don't know, it's gotten worse maybe, or...
I think that's a great metric. That's something that I'll often do, and some of our other co-hosts who are have children like in the late teens, 20s, is have them watch a movie and see what they think, because it can be oftentimes hard when it's a movie you saw when you were that age and it really stuck with you, and then they watch it and they're like, that's the most dated thing I've ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, they're it's like the BCE and is cell phones. It's like before cell phones and after cell phones is like, my daughter will watch any movie that came before cell phones, and so many of the problems in the movie or whatever could be solved if they just had a cell phone. And it's like, okay, but they was not cell phones. You have to just, put that aside. But yeah, I mean, it's great when I introduced her to an older movie, Taxi Driver. She loved Taxi Driver, loved Fight Club, loved Goodfellas, loved, and these, none of them won. So it's like, it's interesting, trying to get somebody younger to see stuff and what resonates. I mean, she loved Back to the Future and then watched the sequels, loved it, wanted to go see the musical. Like, yeah, it's an enchanting movie. And you think that like it was the number 1 box office movie that year. People loved it. It's in the zeitgeist. We still say flux capacitor. We still think of a DeLorean as a time machine. Like all these things that it brought to the table. Like that's, to me, a best movie quality. No one's talking about Out of Africa. Sorry.
And I can kind of see why that one, and particularly with Back to the Future and Out of Africa was such like a huge set piece, and it had the right actors in it, and boring, where the Back to the Future really was like, it was, I think maybe it was a little too pop, a little too kitschy. I don't know. Like, I think I could see why that one, even though it was really well acted, there was a lot of things going for it that maybe it was, and it was also in a way innovative for the time of pop sci-fi kind of movie.
Yeah, absolutely. But here's the thing. It doesn't have to win. It didn't get nominated, is what I'm saying. Like for Best Picture. I mean, it did get nominated, I think, for Screenplay, which it lost, to Witness. The Amish, Harrison Ford hanging out with the Amish.
Yeah, that was pretty good.
It was good. But again, if I'm a writer and I'm like, I could write one of 2 movies. Do I want to write Witness or do I want to write Back to the Future? I know which one I'm writing. If I had that power, and then, it got like nominated for like a sound thing, and that's it. So, again, it doesn't have to win, but just put it in there. It's in my mind, and that's the fun of the show. And Bruce will tell me why I'm an idiot.
As far as lists go, do you think there's a particular genre that has either been overrepresented or underrepresented on nominations and wins?
I mean, look, the genres that never get enough attention, I think, obviously comedy, horror, are always very underrepresented. And then they love the big tearjerker. They love the big location thing. These days it's tough to say. They love things that maybe have some nostalgia or hark to Hollywood or now it's issues. They love that stuff. They do love historical stuff, which is cool. And like if historical thing is done in a fun way, I mean, Mel Gibson kind of, but I love Braveheart. That was a great movie. Halfway through, I was like, man, this is a good movie and this is really well directed and I am enjoying the hell out of this. And then when it won, I was like, wow, okay, another one where like a movie I loved actually won the Oscar. but yeah, horror and comedy, and that's why you only see, the actors will nominate, for best supporting actor or actress. That's where the comedian usually gets in there. A Kevin Kline for Fish Called Wanda, Marissa Tomei winning for My Cousin Vinny. That's where like the comedy people are. Now people are wondering, like, The Substance is a cool movie and got some great performances. Will they reward any of that? I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, those are the two underrated ones, or underrepresented ones, is the horror and the comedy. And I still have a couple of, what I think are going to be nominees. I still have to see a couple of things, but like I saw Heretic, and Hugh Grant is awesome in it. Like, it's not a great movie, but it's, it's fun enough, and he is just phenomenal. Like, do they recognize that or not? I don't know. I mean, he's also a big name guy doing something very against type. So does that play or not? Or is it like, come on, that was a silly movie. We're not gonna feature it. So it's interesting. I mean, obviously they expanded the best pictures to 10. We're back to 10. It used to be, it was 5, then it was 10, then it was 5 again, then 10. So sometimes, movies can sneak in there. And Bruce is, he'll say, like, look, there's movies that have no shot. Everybody's going to vote for one of these top 2 or 3 movies, and then everybody else is the afterthought. But at least they were nominated.
That is an interesting thing to see, like, especially in each year, are they looking for nominees of an actor who's maybe tried something that's really outside of character? And is that the thing that grabs people's attention? Or is it the huge set piece and the thing that's the movie that does what it's exactly supposed to do? That could really change from year to year and how people are thinking and what other movies are out there.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's like, there's one of two things. It's like, somebody doing something, really pushing themselves. I mean, it became the joke. It's like, I mean, look, DiCaprio finally wins for a role in which, this guy was suffering the whole movie in the cold and, the physicality of it. But he could have been nominated won for a whole bunch of movies. His acting is always like top notch. And then like sometimes somebody does the big speech. It's like they come on and they do the big speech, and it's like, yep, that got them the Oscar. You never know what it is that they're looking for. Again, I think is very zeitgeist. What are people talking about? Great performance in a movie that's talked about, like, will rise to the top. I just saw Honora, the Sean Baker movie, and she's great. She steals every scene. She's fantastic. Meanwhile, all the other actors are great in that too. You could nominate almost any of those supporting actors for a supporting role because they were all fantastic. And that's why the movie is so good, is because the whole ensemble is fantastic. And to single out one over the other, I don't know. But the point is, she's great. She should get nominated. Will she win? I don't know. It's also a goofy movie. So, does that register with them, or, but it did win, the Palme d'Or. So, that gives it the cachet that they could say, well, all right.
So I would definitely recommend people go listen to your podcast with Bruce Valanche, the Oscars. What were they thinking? Because I've just been listening to them and binging them and thoroughly enjoying them. As maybe one last question, and then you can share how to find the podcast, is how do you balance, like, when you're planning these, is there just a year that you both say, oh, we got to talk about 1963 or 1978? Especially when we're getting into Oscar season, we're probably right in the heart of it as we're recording in December of 2024. And then they'll really start talking about it in the new year. And then when the actual show comes along, are you going to be really focused on what's happening right now? Or are you going to stay focused on some of the older movies? I'm kind of interested in how you balance that, because there's a lot of fodder there.
Right. Well, obviously we want to cover every year. I try to bounce around. I don't want to just pick a decade and do every year in a row, so it's not that surprising. I like to bounce around. So I'll, also, like I said, Bruce worked on the show for 25 years. So our first episode was the 1989 Oscars, because it also was Bruce's first year working on the show. So we started with that, even though it's not like necessarily one of those controversial years. But it gave us good insight into how Bruce got hired, what it was like. There was no host that year, so it was like a weird thing. The show itself was a little bit of a disaster, so there was some fun stuff. The producer wound up getting, never got to do another Oscars because of the fiasco. So yeah, there was a lot of fun stuff. So I picked that. That was in the 80s. Then we jumped into the 2010s. Then we jumped back to the 70s, I think, or the 80s again. Then we went to the 60s. So I like to jump around. As far as this year's Oscars, it's hilarious because, marketing, they want me to, want us to do shows based on the nominees and based on the winners. And I'm like, that's not our show. Our show is to, we don't care about this year's Oscars. Call me in 10 years, I'll care about this year's Oscars. But because people are going to be searching Oscars, we want them to find our show through searching for the Oscars. So we're definitely going to do an episode where we react to the nominees, and then we're going to do a post after the Oscars. We're going to do our show that just talks about the winners and recap what happened and what our thoughts are on that. So we're definitely going to touch on this year's this upcoming Oscars for this year. But more so, yeah, I like to just bounce around and, there's obviously the big years that everybody talks about, but then I love the little hidden years where nobody's talking about it, but, was this really the best movie? Did The French Connection really deserve to win over, Doug or whatever? I forget exactly. But, it's like, there's some great matchups and there's some great and then there's the chin scratchers where you're just like, how the hell did they, why wasn't Citizen Kane didn't win, but it's like known as the best film of all time. They're not showing How Green Is My Valley in film school. So it's like, it's interesting.
I think your show's entertaining, but I think you're with having Bruce Vilanch there, you're capturing a lot of institutional knowledge that this could become something that people study in the future, because the stories that he throws out and just the knowledge that he has of how the sausage was made is really huge.
Yep, Bruce loves sausage.
Let's. If people want to find your show, where can they find it?
You can find it on Spotify or Apple or anywhere you get podcasts. It's The Oscars, What Were They Thinking?